Welcome to the deep dive. When you look at South Africa today, the big story, the really persistent one, is this deep inequality and cripplingly high unemployment.
Yeah, it's stubborn.
Right. And the usual approaches, relying on foreign investments, sticking to strict free market ideas, they just haven't really cracked it, have they? They haven't created those millions of stable jobs people need.
And that context, that economic reality, is exactly where our sources for today come in. We're
Yeah.
looking at something pretty radical. It's a socialist blueprint called the Foundation to Come.
Hmm.
It's a bold proposal, really. It basically says, look, if the current system isn't delivering, maybe we need to rethink the entire economic architecture.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We're going to unpack the five main pillars of this proposed socialist state. The central idea seems to be taking South Africa's huge import bill, over $50 billion?
Easily, yeah, over $50 billion USD.
Taking that money currently flowing out and using it somehow to fuel domestic growth, create jobs, and crucially generate revenue internally.
Yeah. And here's the really interesting part, or maybe the most ambitious part. The plan claims all this can happen without raising taxes on citizens.
How?
Well, the idea is to generate state wealth through owning production itself, rather than just taxing incomes or consumption.
Okay, let's unpack this, right? Let's start at the very beginning. How do they plan to actually create these jobs? What's the government's role supposed to be?
Okay, so this is a fundamental break from how things usually work. The blueprint says the government needs to own the means of production. The state itself becomes the main driver for jobs and industrial development.
Right.
They even use the phrase unlimited job creation. That's the stated goal.
Unlimited job creation. I mean, that sounds huge, especially given South Africa's history with state-owned enterprises, which, let's be honest, haven't always been models of efficiency.
No, exactly. That's the standard argument against nationalization, isn't it? Inefficiency, bureaucracy.
So how does this blueprint plan to avoid that trap? Because that seems like a massive risk.
Well, this is where the nuance comes in, apparently. It's not about the government owning and managing everything day to day.
Oh, okay.
The model is, first, identify products that are being imported in large volumes, stuff the country is already buying.
Right, existing demand.
Exactly. Then the state steps in and invests in building the infrastructure needed to make those things locally. The factories, the machines, the land. The government owns those assets.
Okay, state owns the physical stuff, but who actually runs the factory? Who makes the business decisions?
And that's the other half, what they call private management. The state actively partners with, say, foreign companies who used to import those goods, or maybe qualified local experts.
So they hire external expertise?
Yeah, essentially. They bring in people with operational know-how to manage the business side. The idea is to get that efficiency, that global expertise, while the public, through the state, keeps ownership of the core assets and, crucially, the profits.
That's a really interesting balancing act, trying to get the public benefit of socialism, the ownership, the jobs, but pair it with private sector efficiency. But where does the money come from to keep building more factories? If it's a cycle, how does it start and sustain itself?
So what's laid out is this idea of a closed loop for revenue. The
Yeah.
government collects money directly from the production happening in these state-owned, privately managed factories.
Okay.
That revenue isn't just supposed to vanish into the general government pot. It's specifically earmarked to be reinvested immediately into building more infrastructure, more factories for other imported goods.
I see. So each successful venture funds the next one.
That's the theory. It creates this self-sustaining cycle. You build one, it makes money, you use that money to build the next, and you keep going, growing industry and jobs until ideally you've replaced most of those imports.
Okay, to really grasp what they're aiming for, the sheer scale of it, we need to look at that import number again. That $50 billion plus that South Africa spends buying things from overseas. Let's look at the anatomy of South African imports.
Absolutely. Because if the state's going to become a manufacturer, it needs to know what to target,
Yeah.
right? Where's the big money going?
Yeah.
And the data really shows just how much the economy depends on imports for basic needs.
So let's hit the big ones. Number one, by a huge margin, is mineral fuels, oils, distillation products, basically everything that powers the country, petrol, diesel, jet fuel.
Yeah, lubricants, the works.
And that's costing nearly $20 billion USD a year.
Just under $20 billion. Yeah. $19.61 billion is the estimate. And that figure alone just shows you the massive challenge here.
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to say you want to replace imported fuel, But to actually replace almost $20 billion worth, you're talking about building enormous, complex, multi-billion-dollar refineries from the ground up.
Plus securing the raw materials, the crude oil.
Exactly. And managing all the global politics that come with it. The investment just in that one sector is colossal.
Okay, what's next on the list after fuel?
Next up is the backbone of industry itself. Machinery, nuclear reactors, boilers. That's around $12.91 billion USD.
So the actual tools needed to build and run everything else.
Pretty much. These are critical capital goods. If we connect this to the bigger picture, relying on imported machinery means South Africa currently can't even build its own factories efficiently without buying key equipment from abroad.
So for this blueprint to work, the state wouldn't just be making, I don't know, shoes or clothes. It would eventually need to build the capacity to make the high-tech machines that make the shoe and clothes.
Precisely, which is a whole different level of technical difficulty, a much steeper climb.
And rounding out the top three.
Electrical and electronic equipment. Think everything from smartphones and TVs for consumers to complex industrial sensors used in mining or utilities. That's about $9.86 billion USD.
Wow. The complexity of just that global supply chain, it's mind-boggling.
It really is.
Yeah.
And those three categories alone are, what, over $40 billion?
Yeah, roughly.
And the list goes on. Vehicles are another big one, about $7.14 billion USD. And then there's something really critical, pharmaceuticals.
Ah, medicines.
Yeah, essential medicines.
Yeah.
That's about $2.42 billion USD in imports. Relying on other countries for vital drugs is a huge vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
That's something this blueprint definitely wants to tackle with local production.
Okay, so the data clearly shows the scale. The opportunity, if you could capture that $50 billion domestically, is massive. But as you said, the technical and financial hurdles are equally enormous.
Definitely.
So the blueprint then pivots, doesn't it? From these huge industrial plans to the millions who need jobs, but also basic things like housing.
Right, that takes us to Section 3. This is where the plan tries to weave social policy into the economic strategy, looking at land reform and community development. It's designed to support that industrial growth we just talked about.
And the first part is tackling housing, trying to deal with informal settlements by linking housing directly to these new state-owned workplaces.
Yeah, the idea is to fight what they call commuter poverty. So when the state builds a new industrial park or sets up a large state farm, it also builds public housing right there for the workers.
Okay.
And these aren't just basic shelters. They're planned as self-contained communities designed to cut living costs way down. No more long, expensive commutes that eat up wages.
And the shops and services inside these communities, are they private?
No, that's key. Things like local grocery stores, maybe the community transport, essential services, they'd also be government or community-owned.
Ah, I see.
So the money spent by workers on daily necessities actually stays within the community, ideally reinvested to improve local services, schools, clinics, whatever is needed. And it's the low-income workers in these new state jobs, the factory workers, the farm workers, who qualify for this stable, affordable housing.
Okay, now let's get to maybe the most controversial part, agriculture and land. The blueprint proposes a complete shift away from private farmland ownership. That's politically explosive territory.
It's probably the most radical social change proposed, yes. All farmland would essentially become government-owned and managed.
Why? What's the stated goal there?
The stated goal is to end the instability and, frankly, the exploitation often seen with farm labor under the current private system to provide security.
So how does it change life for an agricultural worker under this plan?
Well, instead of being casual or seasonal labor, farm workers would become permanent full-time government employees. They'd get a stable, fixed wage.
A salary,
Number salary, yes. The aim is to lift them out of that precarious low-wage trap immediately. And importantly, they'd also qualify for that new public housing being built near the state farms.
What's fascinating here is it's almost like social engineering, isn't it? You guarantee housing, you guarantee a decent government wage, and suddenly jobs in farming, which were often hard to fill or rely on exploited labor, might become much more attractive to citizens. Is that the idea?
That seemed to be the core incentive mechanism, yeah. Stabilize the workforce, boost food security for the nation, and bring these often marginalized workers fully into the formal economy with proper protections and benefits. It ties land, jobs, and housing together very tightly.
So land stops being primarily a source of private wealth accumulation.
And becomes state infrastructure, managed for national employment and food production. That's the vision.
All right, moving into our final section then. Let's quickly recap the main outcomes this blueprint promises. These are the big results they claim will come from implementing this whole model.
Okay, first, the big one. Increased government revenue, but without raising taxes. The state acts like a shareholder, collecting profits from production, and a landlord collecting rent, effectively taxing the economic activity itself.
Right, taxing the production, not the person directly. Second, they promise a LEM wage for everyone involved in these state enterprises, aiming to pull people out of poverty.
Third, reduced inequality. The argument is that by directly tackling unemployment and the housing crisis through this centralized ownership model, you address the root causes of inequality.
Fourth is an interesting one. Enhanced national security. How do they argue that?
Well, the thinking is that if you have stable jobs, guaranteed housing, and local production of essentials like food, medicine, fuel, it reduces internal instability. It also, they argue, lessens the economic drivers for illegal immigration if people have opportunities at home.
Okay. And the fifth outcome.
Is really about the government's role transforming. It becomes this huge real estate investor and manager owning everything from factories to apartment blocks. These assets are then privately managed, generating ongoing revenue for the state to fund public services.
So what does this all mean when you boil it down?
I think the core argument underpinning all of this is fundamentally philosophical. It comes from a belief stated in the source material that the current setup is unfair. They say, look, South African citizens are the labor, and they're the consumers, but they don't own the means of production. And because of that, the wealth generated inevitably flows outwards, or to a small elite.
So by changing who owns the assets.
Exactly. By shifting ownership to the state, representing the people, the goal is to move South Africa from being just a consumer dependent on global markets to being the owner of the entire economic cycle, production, labor, and demand. It's an attempt to completely internalize the economy to make sure that $50 billion and the profits generated from it stay within the country.
It's certainly one of the most comprehensive and radical economic and social restructuring plans imaginable for the region. We've covered a lot from oil imports to farmland ownership. It really is aiming to fundamentally change the country's entire economic model.
It absolutely is.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you, the listener, to think about. This entire socialist blueprint seems to hang on the government's ability to do two things really well simultaneously, things that might even conflict. Maintain total state ownership and ensure highly efficient, corruption-free private management of those assets.
That's the tightrope walk, isn't it?
So the provocative question is full government ownership of all critical manufacturing and all farmland really the quickest, most effective path to stable employment and national prosperity? Or does the sheer staggering scale of the upfront investment needed, just think of that nearly $20 billion for fuel production alone, pose such a massive implementation hurdle that the promised benefits might never actually materialize?